Installment number 171 of JC and Morgan. Football season is here. Week 0. Again, that was the garnish, the appetizer. Maybe some seasoned bread with some good butter. Maybe even a light salad. But this past week, this was the main course. This was everything. This was the meat, the potatoes. If you're a vegetarian, it was what do vegetarians eat? It was a tofu. It was a big tofu burger. It was a big, juicy tofu burger with all kinds of fixins and all that other good veggie stuff. It was fantastic. Week 1 rarely disappoints. This week 1 was an outstanding slate of games, and most of them lived up to the billing. And then it wasn't even the headliner games that stole the show. We talked about Utah, Florida was going to be probably the best, most competitive game on the board. It lived up to it. And then you just had wacky games. We love the wackiness. We love the fact that these are, when you've got teenagers on the field, things like giving up 40 points in a fourth quarter, but still winning like North Carolina did. Things like a kicker missing 2 chip shots like East Carolina did. Like all these things just happened in a tidal wave of entertainment. And I would imagine that when the ratings come in, they're going to be awfully good for week 1 of college football. So we've got a lot to talk about to you, with you, and with us. Mike Morgan, JC Shurburtt, Mike Morgan of ESPN, SEC Network, JC Shurburtt at 24/7 Sports. We'll have our producer extraordinaire, Michael Haney, chime in momentarily, get the hot Haney 5 cranked up. We've got Under the Radar. We've got our Don't Sleep On segment. How happy was I to see Old Dominion pull off the win over Virginia Tech? No knock on Virginia Tech, but I said 2 things. There'd be an FCS team that won, and there'd be a Group 5 that was going to beat a Power 5. That both happened. It's the second time Old Dominion's done it against Virginia Tech. Delaware defeated Navy. Kind of an off-the-radar game, but congratulations. Joe Flacco was not playing in that game, but Delaware did beat Navy. So we'll cover all that and then look ahead as we ordinarily do, even give some picks later on. JC, how did things stand out to you in week 1 of the college football campaign?
Well, it was a good weekend. I agree with everything you said. I thought, and I know we're going to talk about it later. Iowa, South Dakota State. I mean, my gosh. I think Iowa needs to maybe look at their quarterback situation a little bit. Two safeties and a field goal. They went 7-3 against the Jackrabbits, who before Saturday were more well known to be a NCAA tournament basketball team. I actually have some Jackrabbits gear, by the way. One of the most underrated performances of the weekend, Oregon State 34, Boise State 17.
Yeah.
I think the Beavers are going to be pretty good this year. Other than that, the SEC action was tremendous. The 2 major schools in the state of North Carolina, NC State and UNC, didn't travel outside the border of their states. But, boy, those were scary, scary games for both those teams in different ways. Florida, big win for them. And then, finally, Florida State fans have been through so much the last however many years. Good to see them get that victory, as improbable as it was, on Sunday night. Ohio State Notre Dame was a really good football game. Georgia Oregon was not. Just kind of those things sort of stood out. But you're right, it was not a disappointing weekend of college football.
Yeah, and LSU Florida State got off to kind of a sluggish start. It was one of those where it was like, okay, new coach, but LSU still got issues. They've got a leaky offensive line. You started to wonder, did they make the right call at quarterback? Jaden really redeemed himself in the fourth quarter, particularly on that 99-yard drive where he was brilliant. But there was a lot to not like about LSU. And then you have that amazing comeback, and, Florida State basically gives you a gift. You take advantage, and then don't blame the kicker on that extra point. That kick had no chance. You could have brought back Jan Stenerud and George Blanda and Pete Stoyanovich, and I don't know, give me another kicker that just had
Yeah.
to rattle off the tongue. You didn't block. Entire left side of the formation got blown up, and the kick had it wasn't like the kick was just low. So anyway, what I've noticed already, guys, is that a lot of people just don't like Brian Kelly. And I don't know
Yeah.
why that is, but they seem to like revel in his loss. Is it the fake Southern accent? Like, I get it that came across as disingenuous. Is the fact that he came from Notre Dame? Maybe, I don't know, but there was a lot of just like, it wasn't from Seminole fans. It was vitriol, like, haha, Brian Kelly, you suck. I'm glad you lost. I hope your family is in an unfortunate car accident. It was just like,
It
I
was
try not
terrible.
to judge humanity on Twitter, but man, it was brutal.
I think that most of that comes from the way he exited Central Michigan and Cincinnati collectively. I think that's where, if I had to pinpoint,
Yeah.
where that
Are
comes
we
from.
still bitter about that? Like, that was
well,
10
I
years
think
ago.
you add those two things with him being the coach at Notre Dame,
Yeah.
and then Notre Dame having the Schadenfreude that they do nationally. I think that's the pot of gumbo with Brian Kelly, and then obviously the fake Southern accent going into LSU fish out of water deal.
Yeah.
Just all kind of mixes together. I think that's where that comes from.
Well, you might be right, because, and the Central Michigan one I don't remember as well as the Cincinnati one everybody remembers, right? Like, it was one of those, like, where coaches feel like they must lie or at least be somewhat dishonest about the fact of what their true intentions are, and they all do it. But Brian Kelly's was very notable at the time, and so maybe that rubbed some people the wrong way. But I mean, the guy did a great job at Notre Dame. Anyway, by the way, Notre Dame, Ohio State, I missed a lot of that game because I was working. Why Ohio State wasn't better offensively, I don't have an answer for. That they are beyond loaded. So I get it. Notre Dame, good defense, credit Marcus Freeman, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But why in the world Ohio State shouldn't struggle to score points against anybody? So I don't know. You guys might have seen more of that one than I did, but that the score surprised me more than the actual result.
I thought Notre Dame had a really good defensive game plan. I also think Notre Dame, their lines of scrimmage are probably upcycling a bit. And you're right. I mean, I don't know why Ohio State was misfiring. They're supposed to be, if not the best offense in the country, one of the best. I think maybe game one, though, Mike, you come out and, I'm trying to think of like the last time Ohio State played a big time opener. I'm probably wrong about this. I think it was Virginia Tech 2 years back to back. And that first year, the Hokies got them up in Columbus. Urban Meyer was the coach there. And then the next year they rolled. But I think sometimes teams that do have good offenses, they don't necessarily, they got misfire because it's the first time, especially when you're playing a good team. I thought it was a heck of a game. There's a lot Notre Dame can take from that, I think, and improve upon. Kudos to Ohio State defense, which was not, that was kind of a bugaboo for them last year, was defensively, and to hold the Irish to 10 points, I think is a pretty good accomplishment. But yeah, if you would have asked me what that final would have been, Mike, I thought Notre Dame could play it close, but I thought more of like a 35-28-ish game than a 21-10.
Yeah. This wouldn't qualify as under the radar because everybody knows what a great job that he did. And it was a coup to get him. But Jim Knowles, I mean, that's the difference, right? What he did at Oklahoma State, a program that has been notorious for putting up a lot of points and giving up a ton of points. He actually had them as one of the top defenses in the country. I never thought I'd see that in Stillwater in the Big 12, but he did it. So Ohio State, you wonder why the rich get richer. I mean, this is why. Like, Jim Knowles had a great job at Oklahoma State, made great money at Oklahoma State, was treated like a god at Oklahoma State, but Ohio State's just better. And so it's a continual poaching of the top players through the portal and the top coaches through free agency, if you will. So that's why we're not changing anytime soon in the hierarchy of college football. Jim Knowles could have been just as dominating at Oklahoma State, but they're not going to win as many games. and Oklahoma State probably wasn't prepared to pay him quite as much money. So, again, doesn't qualify for under the radar, but certainly his presence was known. I'll tell you what does qualify for under the radar before we get into the hot Haney 5 and some other subjects. I was in Kentucky, did that game. The Kentucky wide receivers, people wanted to know who will replace Wan'Dale Robinson. Remember the names Dane Key and Berrien Brown both showed out pretty well. And not to mention the Robinson kid for the transfer from Virginia Tech. They've got the big matchup against Florida that we'll talk about later. But their bigger concern is going to be an offensive line that lost 3 starters. That's going to be the issue for Kentucky this year. I'm telling you right now, it's not as much the wide receivers or some of the losses on defense. It's going to be their offensive line, which the Big Blue Wall did not look like it in their week 1 win against Miami of Ohio. We referenced the game. Might as well mention the name. Remember when Al Golden was just like a bad word because of what happened at Miami? And again, he was just like a piñata. And your typical chorus of Miami fans that have never so much as been on the campus, but love to get you tattoos on their deltoid and so on and so forth. We know it's like the Jersey Shore of fan bases. They wanted to pretend like Al Golden was the only thing that wasn't working at Miami. Al Golden actually at a time was a pretty good coach. Well, he's now the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame and obviously did good work in that Ohio State game. I know it feels like forever ago, but Thursday night, under the radar, just how good the backyard brawl is. 75 miles separating Pitt and West Virginia. That game needs to be played every day, and it was phenomenal. And then I would also add Chase Bryce at App State. Remember, Chase Bryce is part of the reason why Clemson won that second national title, right? I mean, remember the throw that he made? Who was the game against? Help me, guys. Syracuse, right? Was it Syracuse?
Yes.
Okay.
Pretty sure that's who it was.
Yeah. He's bounced around, and now Chase Bryce is with App State. They should have won that game. He was very good. And then I'll say one other thing. Two other things. Everybody knows what Anthony Richardson did for Florida. Montrell Johnson was the most consistent weapon in that game. He is the transfer running back from Louisiana. That probably didn't draw much attention when he followed Billy Napier, but he looks like a beast for their ground game. And then you mentioned the game, JC, Iowa's ability to win ugly games. How about this for a stat? Since 2020, teams that won a game with 8 or more punts, Iowa's done it 6 times now. 6 times. Nobody else has done it more than twice. So I don't know what to make of that. It was an awful game. They scored 7 points without a touchdown. They had 2 safeties against South Dakota State, but by golly, they know how to win ugly as well as anybody over there at Iowa.
Yeah, and that was an ugly game. That was one of the picks I did not get right over the weekend. I had a bad week as far as like predicting what would happen in games, but as far as predicting outcomes, I was pretty stellar. I looked at the line and it was like, South Dakota State was getting 10.5. And I was like, this is not North Dakota State. This is South Dakota State. This is the Jackrabbits, not the Bison, which is basically the Ohio State of FCS, or the Alabama of FCS. And so I was like, well, Iowa, they should win it probably about like 24-6 if it's ugly. But then when I saw Iowa's quarterback trying to throw the ball, I was like, oh, they probably are going to lose. Yeah. And sure enough, he didn't help them much. They've got problems up there, but when you can win ugly, sometimes they live to fight another day. You make adjustments. Kirk Ferentz has been doing it a long time, and you go through and you see how you can fix things. And that's what good coaches do. And certainly he is one, and you'd much rather win ugly than the alternative.
One last segment that I'll go through quickly here, because I know we're pressed on time, and Hot Haney 5 is just chomping at the bit over there. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. The close calls. You just mentioned one of them, South Dakota State could have easily beaten Iowa. East Carolina should have beaten NC State. I don't know why you ever schedule a game in Greenville. App State should have beaten Chapel Hill. My man, Gene Chiswick, 40 points in the fourth quarter.
Baffling.
They were god awful on defense before him. Like, it's going to take more than a year to get that straight. And Texas San Antonio had Houston, had them. They let him off the hook. So the Roadrunners could have had a nice win over a future Big 12 team now in the AAC. Michael Haney, we welcome you back. You got a chance to get your feet wet into the college football scene. Hope you had a good Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and yes, even Monday. Clemson blows out Georgia Tech.
This is the first free weekend, like full free weekend, that I have actually had to really sit down and watch college football in a long time. So it was an absolute blast on Saturday to get to experience all of that, like right out of the gate, the North Carolina games that you're mentioning, and what fun that was just to see the craziness that is college football and what makes it so special and why we enjoy doing things like this and what pulls me back in. Just
Yes.
think that the music world's going to completely take me away. Of course not. I've got to be in it. And of course, I do work with the guys in Sister Hazel. They're huge Florida Gator fans. So I know that Saturday night, they were ecstatic with the debut of Billy Napier there in the swamp, knocking off number 7 Utah. Anthony Richardson, as you mentioned, Mike, everybody knows what he did. So my first question here in the Hot Haney 5 goes to a tweet that came from one Greg McElroy, where he compared Anthony Richardson to Vince Young. So Mike, JC, your opinion on what we saw from Anthony Richardson the other night and that kind of, I guess, comparison / expectation being put on the quarterback in his first outing against Billy Napier.
Couple things to note. Vince Young wasn't Vince Young until his final year at Texas. And everybody remembers it culminated in that Rose Bowl, one of the best national championship game performances by any quarterback ever. But before that, it was a little bit up and down. Like Vince Young was not a complete product right away in Austin, and neither is Anthony Richardson. But you see the signs. I've been on record saying, as someone who covered Cam Newton at Auburn in the first few years in the league with the Carolina Panthers, he's not Cam Newton, I don't believe. Cam Newton was an alien, okay? Cam Newton, even though, unfortunately, for various reasons, I think you could make the argument he never fulfilled his potential in the NFL, and that's on Cam. But Cam in college, with a very pedestrian group of receivers, had one hell of an arm and did not struggle with accuracy in college. Pro, little bit different story. Anthony Richardson's not there yet as a passer. So he's a freak. He's going to make freakish plays like the 2-point conversion. And he's physically built similar to Cam, although I would say, again, I've never seen anybody look like Cam in terms of pure physical stature, not just big. He was shredded. But I think the Vince Young comparison is actually a better one. And I would remind people that Vince Young was not always the All-American that you saw at Texas. It took a little bit of time, and maybe that's the case with Anthony Richardson, but he made one hell of a statement on Saturday.
Oh, I think so too. And he's the perfect fit for what Billy Napier likes to do on offense. If you watch Louisiana last year, they ran the quarterback a whole lot, like to establish the power run game and then selectively pass. And, I thought that all went well on Saturday for Anthony. And I'll remind people too about, this Vince Young comparison. Vince, when he got to be a senior, he had that weird delivery. It was almost underhanded, right? But you'd be watching that. I watched a lot of Texas football that year because I was in my first year working at Rivals.com, and my boss was a Texas fan, so he'd have me over and we watched a bunch of Texas, right? And boy, Vince would drop back and you'd see the ball leave his hands and you'd be like, oh, this may get picked. And then Lima Swede, he hit him right in the hands, and it just somehow the ball got there. And so if Anthony Richardson can fine tune that's great. I mean, look, let's be honest. Florida won the game. They stopped them late. Credit their defense too for kind of hanging tough. Are we about to say a star is born? I'd have to wait on that just a little bit, but I certainly like his skill set and his tools. Always have. Always kind of wondered why Dan Mullen wasn't playing him more. And it looks like Napier's rallied behind him. And, sometimes you need the right coach to come in there and fit what you do as a player. And I definitely think Napier's system is perfect for Anthony Richardson. They need to hope he doesn't, they keep him healthy, because he's a big part of that offense. But I do think that is a great fit based on what we saw, Saturday, and also when you're just lining up the general skill sets and scheme.
Michael?
Moving on to question number 2. We stay with quarterbacks here. I want to go back to a question that I asked as sort of an addendum to an overall point about Clemson's place in the ACC and whether this would be a bounce back year or whether or not the conference was poised to at least challenge Clemson for consecutive years going forward. But we did see Georgia Tech last night hang a little tougher with the Tigers than most people expected. It was 14-10 late in the third quarter. The final score 41-10 belies how close that game actually was as the clock ticked down into the third. But one of the questions that I added into that overall last week was whether or not you guys felt that DJ would continue to be the quarterback halfway through the season for Clemson. Is anything that you saw last night, again, as they say in golf, it's not how you drive, it's how you arrive. At the end of the day, Clemson pulls away and wins. It's a great Houdini act by DJ on a 3rd and 4, getting pulled to the ground, flicks a pass and gets a first down, keeps a drive going, and the Tigers ultimately pull away. But is there anything that you saw last night that maybe changes your opinion? Both of you said that he would still continue to be the guy for the Tigers. What do you think about that performance last night from Clemson and their quarterback situation?
Nice golf metaphor to kick in here in week 1. I like that. It's not how you drive, it's how you arrive. I don't do either well, so I can use that some next time I'm on the links putting divots all over the course. Look, I was not sold on much of what I saw against a hapless Georgia Tech team who's probably going to have a coaching change by year's end, and just now that you lost Gibbs to Alabama, like I can tell you, living in Atlanta, there's no buzz, no pun intended, about Georgia Tech football. It's just like it's just like one big malaise surrounding Georgia Tech. So this was a game, and I realized they tacked it on late after I fell asleep, but that game was way too competitive through 2-3 quarters. And all I can say is, after watching DJ, I'm not giving up on him, but depending on how Cade Klubnik looks in practice, I certainly wouldn't give up on the possibility that Dabo does it for a 3rd time, where he benches his starter and takes his blue chip All-American and makes him the guy. DJ's going to have to play better in against greater competition. Now, he won't be tested as much as some other guys that are playing in the Big Ten or the SEC, but he is going to be tested more than he was against Georgia Tech. So I would like to see better out of DJ.
I was surprised Clemson's offensive line didn't play as well as I expected. You talk to folks around that program that on paper is the best one they've had. Yet you still saw some struggles. Again, the buzz out of Tiger Town. There's a lot of Klubnik buzz right now. And so, I don't know, maybe it's because of the history you mentioned, Mike, maybe not. I do think that, DJ, everybody has to remember he was really, really good during the pandemic year. There are a lot of offensive players that were really, really good during the pandemic year that now that defense is kind of back or not. And so I think the hope is that he, takes that next step. But I mean, he doesn't have the receivers he had in 2020 either. I mean, you got to keep that into account too. I thought Clemson did a good job pulling away. I was, shocked almost. Shocked is probably too strong of a word, but when Tech pulled it to 14-10 in the third quarter, I'm like, wow. I get the final score of this game last year was 14-8 Clemson, so maybe I shouldn't be that surprised. But the Tigers ultimately pulled away. I just don't think Georgia Tech's a very good team and won't be this year. But if you're Clemson, you got Furman, Louisiana Tech, at Wake Forest, top 25 team, yes, a team Dabo Swinney I don't believe has ever lost to. And then that game against NC State, despite NC State's struggles against East Carolina, I thought they did look big and athletic and fast, especially on defense. So, tip of the cap to Dave Dorn, at least, for putting a squad out there that looks the part, right? And so that's going to be, that's not until October 1st. So there's the next big challenge for DJ and the Tigers. So he could hold on to the job for a while, in my opinion. But that first loss comes, if it does, you're going to start hearing howls for the backup.
All right, moving on to question number 3. You guys touched on it because it was just such a weird train wreck of a game to watch. But Iowa struggling to get their victory and getting 7 the hard way, as they did. The local paper saying Iowa victory, but not putting the O's in either one of the words in Iowa and victory, having some fun at the expense of the Hawkeyes there before their big rivalry game this weekend with Iowa State. But guys, this one goes a little bit deeper. I want you to put your thinking caps on with this one. Brian Ferentz is the offensive coordinator for his father, Kirk, there for the Hawkeyes, has been since 2017. Mike, you said, I don't know how many teams out there can look as ugly as they do and still find ways to win. So in some capacity, this is working. But the question is this. It's about the father-son relationships. What is one of the, I guess, more hamstrung, I don't know if egregious is the right word to put it, father-son relationships that have had a negative effect, if you will. Again, wins are still there for them to a point, but a negative effect on a college football program that you can remember in this kind of situation for what Iowa has right now as an offense?
Well, the names that come to mind are the Bowdens, who eventually, of course, went up against one another, and that became insufferable. The hype around Bowden Bowl 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the Stoops, and I would say, I guess the Stoops were all brothers, right? That wasn't father son. But I was front and center for one of the most awkward situations, which was Lou Holtz and Skip Holtz, and the problem wasn't Skip; it was more Lou. And instead, Lou sold his son down the river after Lou insisted on an offense. Skip was all about the spread. That's what he came to South Carolina knowing and utilizing those first 2 years, those Outback Bowl years, and then under Phil Petty. And then Lou wanted his next Tony Rice, and basically had Skip told him, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to go to option, and the offense sputtered. And he wound up demoting his son, which was wrong at the time, and I still maintain it was wrong. So you that's like reverse nepotism, right? Like usually it's the son that's getting a gig that he's not qualified for and maybe bringing down his dad. In this case, I think it was actually upside down.
Yeah, I remember that too well. He wasn't technically a coordinator, but he did get to call plays sometimes as Steve Spurrier Jr. at South Carolina. I think one of the qualifications to be the head coach at Carolina now is maybe that you have girls as kids. But Muschamp had some sons, and Beamer obviously has one son and some daughters, but it just gets awkward. I think the worst one, though, Lou and Skip aside, and Junior and the head ball coach aside, had to be the Jeff Bowden situation at Florida State, because you had such a successful program and such a big run of success. And then Jeff Bowden gets his hands on the wheel, and that thing just went south. I mean, badly. And he had to replace him. And it was just, you're asking a legend to replace your son. And it's not Tommy or Terry, who at least they've won games here and there, in different places. It's Jeff. And that had to be the worst one that I've seen was that situation. It just, it didn't work out. Then, of course, they never let Jay Paterno do much at Penn State besides, manage his dad or whatever. So there was no, I don't think there's any X's and O's situations where he
Is Jay still working?
Obviously, no, he's just out there.
He's done.
He's just out there. He's a little bitter.
I know that.
So that was the deal. But that Bowden situation, I remember sort of dramatic. I remember reading all about it, hearing about it. That was probably, the worst one that I've seen.
Yeah. We only need nepotism in broadcasting, which is omnipresent to say the least. We don't need it in coaching.
Yeah, no doubt. And usually this doesn't work out, man. It just doesn't work out unless your son is, great. It just, and dads and sons have different philosophies anyway, like you mentioned. Now that Lou thing was crazy. I mean, it was just nuts that he wanted to do that. Of course, it was Lou Holtz and, 2002. But it just it never made a whole lot of sense. And most people around South Carolina looking back on it were like, hey, Skip Holtz probably should have just been calling his offense the whole time.
Skip's been done wrong a few times. I mean, he should never have gotten fired at Louisiana Tech. That's a whole other chapter in that 30 for 30. All right, Michael, number 3. That was a curveball. Number 3.
We're moving on to number 4.
We're number 4. Number 3 was a curveball. What's number 4?
You're Serrano in Major League. You missed the curveball there, Mike.
I did. Well, I don't think I missed it, but I wasn't expecting it. I think I put it in play. Man, I hit a home run, but I think I got something.
Fair enough. Let's move on with the announcement of the college football playoff coming on a Friday right before holiday weekend. Odd time for that to happen, gentlemen. Wouldn't you say? Like all the exciting things that could happen.
Talk about burying the lead. Yeah, it's a news dump time. It's like the biggest story surrounding the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we buried the lead with this in number 4. So I was just trying to follow along with the powers that be at college football. But it's 9 months, guys. It's what was being talked about from the very beginning. I guess to quote Bob Dylan from "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right." I'm not saying that you did me unkind. You just kind of wasted all my precious time. So what changed in 9 months that we could just already had this thing done and solidified and ready to rock and roll almost a year ago?
You sounded like Johnny Depp and Blow. You're just random Bob Dylan quotes. You say the man with the plan, but where's the man with the sedan? And I don't know. Good movie, Blow. Let me just say this. This was bound to happen. I told you at the ESPN seminar, they had our guy there. I always forget his name. Who the executive director of the playoff, Bill Hancock. And he goes up there and look, Bill's in an unwinnable situation because he really has no power, but he is the mouthpiece for the people that run the playoff. And so a lot of times you listen to Bill and it's like, okay, he's saying what he's supposed to say, but did we really learn anything? But he dropped about 17 hints. I was sitting there with my notepad and pen and I was like, this is going to happen. And this is going to be 12, and this is going to happen soon. You could just tell, like the way he was saying it, there was a degree of confidence that he had already spoken to the decision makers, and this was going to happen. Look, this is what I've wanted for a while now. I used to be an 8-team guy. I didn't think they could pull off the right formula for 12. I'm telling you, in a sport where no good decisions seem to ever happen, and the lack of insight is so god awful that you just have no faith or confidence that they could pull this off. The format and the formula is perfect. I'm here to tell you it's perfect. And I know there's some people that still want to hang on to, well, we should stay with 4 if expansion is going to ruin the sport. You're wrong. You're just flat out wrong. The amount of games in November that are going to be relevant now, it's exponentially more. The amount of conferences that have some semblance of relevancy now are so. Think about this. I mean, everybody talks about we're going to an SEC, Big Ten, NFC, AFC. Well, if that's the case, keep in mind those top 4 seeds, which get a bye, there's not going to be 2 SEC, 2 Big Ten. You can't have more than one conference getting the top 4 seeds. That is an incredible concession by Greg Sankey and Kevin Warren. Because there would be several years where those top 4 seeds that get a bye would be dominated by those 2 conferences. But now you're going to have a Pac-12 have a chance, an ACC, a Big 12 have a chance. All these things are now in play that wouldn't otherwise be in play. And I'm going to give you a number. Okay, the BCS, the godforsaken BCS, started in 1998. And of course that was 2. And then, we had 4. So what is that? 98, 08, 8. We're talking about 24 years, give or take. If we had this 8-team playoff, what's our biggest complaint about college football? It's too predictable. It's the same teams. You guys want to take a guess at how many different teams, if we had started a 12-team playoff in 1998, how many different schools would have had the opportunity to showcase on a huge national stage and say, we made it? Much like a team that makes the Final Four in basketball, but they don't win the national title. There's still a damn a banner in that arena because that's a huge deal. If you go to the College World Series, but you don't win it all, you still put CWS 2005 because that's a huge deal. If you make it to a 12-team college football playoff, that is a huge deal, much bigger deal than making the Meineke Car Care Bowl. People are going to celebrate it. It's going to be historic. So how many schools would have gotten at least one playoff appearance if we had this since 1998? Michael, I'll go to you first.
I would guess roughly, let's see, there's 120, 130?
130 Division I schools as of today.
I'm going to say almost half of those teams would have made at least one appearance.
So you would say 60.
Yeah.
Right, JC?
I'm going to go less. I'm going to 40 on that, 40, 41, something like that.
See, that's where I would have been, and you and I would have both been wrong. 66 teams would have gotten into the playoff. You want to take a guess who would have had the most appearances with 18? Michael?
It's going to be between Alabama and Ohio State, but I know Bama was in a floor. I'm going to go Ohio State.
Ohio State. Michael's on a roll. Ohio State with 18. Oklahoma second, by the way, 16. Alabama 13. But that's not the story. The story is as you go down and you see Boise State would have been in there 8 times. Kansas State would have been in there 8 times. TCU 8 times. Wisconsin 8 times. How about Michigan State 6 times? For Miami fanboys, 6 times. Stanford 6 times. Baylor 4 times. Baylor would have been in. They would have had one of those buys last year, by the way. Cincinnati, what a great story that was last year. You would have had that great story 4 times. Iowa, ugly winning Iowa would have gotten there 4 times. Utah 4 times. Tennessee 4 times. UCF 3 times. Ole Miss twice. South Carolina twice. You heard me, Gamecock fans. West Virginia twice. Arizona State, California, Coastal Carolina, Georgia Tech, and Hawaii once. You can't tell me that that's not good for the sport. Oh, they're never going to win it all. Who cares? Do we say that after a Final Four? A Cinderella that makes to a Final Four? Oh, but they didn't win it all. No, it's a great story nonetheless. I'm not all about the word inclusive when it comes to just your typical postseason sports setup. But in this case, inclusivity where it's still very much earned and you still have a chance to give a little bit of variety to this postseason in college football, I think it's a good thing.
I don't think it kills the bowls either. When you look at it, because you're talking about 12 teams versus eight more teams. So what's that? 4 more games that you won't have. And there's a chance to include more bowl games because they're not doing. I think the only tweak to this was the original deal was everything, first round and quarterfinals were on campus sites.
And you and I talked about that.
Yeah.
That didn't make sense to not have the first round on site.
Yeah, but like Notre Dame can never play in the quarters, or get a bye into the quarters because
right.
they're not going to be a conference champ. But boy, they're going to love to have that home game. It's their de facto conference championship game if they finish high enough, or wherever they go to play. So it works out well for them. If I'm the group of 5, and Mike, I've never been a fan of including the group of 5 until this format. This format to me gives them a fighting chance. It's like, okay, you want in, you're going to have to earn it. But in the case where, the Pac-12 championship game is a 7-5 Arizona State versus a 11-1 Washington or somebody, and the Sun Devils pull the massive upset, they're probably not going to be among the top 4 conference champions or in the playoff. That gives 2 group of 5 conference champions a chance to make it in. And I think that kind of makes it fair. It rewards everything. It rewards strength of schedule. It rewards winning the conference. I think it is very inclusive. The only thing I have is I hope the committee introduces maybe a little bit of data into the process. I think that when I've looked at the selection so far, and I don't have a lot to argue about with the selection so far during the playoff era, it's real old school thinking. It's real like, all right, if you go undefeated, that means everything and you're in. Whereas really there's some debate, especially in certain years. Notre Dame a few years back, 12-0, great. Didn't play but one team with a winning record. And sure, Florida State was down, Virginia Tech was down, Southern Cal was down that year. But really that one opening win over Michigan went so far for them, and maybe it shouldn't have. So that's the only thing I hope is maybe the process becomes a little bit more sophisticated, not by much. And I think it'll be a heck of a deal for college football.
I think it's going to add a lot of parity, especially in the recruiting world. And JC, I know that's something that you can speak to, not to dig into the NIL stuff, but that's already something that's adding a layer of parity. And we're seeing transfer portal situations happen with NIL, but there's only been a handful of teams, it feels like, that have been in the playoff. And when you go on the recruiting trail, I think, like when the season starts, if you're like 97% of schools, that you're not going to the playoff, and now you feel like there's at least an opportunity when this thing really gets going and we get we get in it 5 to 6 years of a 12-team playoff. There's going to be some schools, like you said, Mike, it's like going to the College World Series. You might not win the whole thing, but you got in, and you can say that you can actually compete. You got a puncher's chance of getting in to play for the big prize. And I think that certainly is going to be another layer that I'm curious to see how it affects certain schools in recruiting it within the next decade once this thing really gets solidified.
Yeah, and just to put a bow on it, again, you're still going to have to climb the mountaintop with some insurmountable odds to get there as a Group 5, because these 12 teams, it's still going to be chock full of the power programs. So 6 conference champs we still have at the moment, depending on what the Pac-12 does or doesn't do. And I think they're actually going to salvage their existence. And I think the Big 12 is in good shape, and the other 2 are obviously in great shape. That one non-Power 5 conference champion that's going to get in every year, you don't just have to, like, as JC mentioned, go undefeated. You also have to be the best, perhaps, of multiple undefeateds in the Group 5. So if you had, if UCF went 13-0 in the American, and if Coastal Carolina went 13-0 in the Sun Belt, there's only one guarantee that's going to get in. The other one has to hope to beat out SEC, Big 10, Big 12 heavyweights to sneak in as a wild card team. And we can always debate the formula in there. And there's always some, here's the thing about, this is where we are in general. It's not just sports debates. I don't mind having intelligent debates. And I don't mind having one opinion versus another, but it's when you use just silly arguments. Like, if you want to be against this, okay, that's fine. Doesn't make you a bad person. If you want to be against it and your number one thing is, well, 13's still going to be mad, so what? By that rationale, if we have 2, then 3 is going to be mad. If we have 4, then 5 is going to be mad. If we had 32, then 33 is going to be mad. That's a dumb, nonsensical argument to not expand and to not make this happen. So is it going to be perfect? No, but it's going to be better than what we have now. The 14 playoff has not been great. And I'm not saying that it's worse than the BCS, because it's not. But we needed to spice it up. Oh, by the way, it's an extra $450 million. I realize it doesn't go in our pockets as fans, but it is good for the sport overall. So look, I was disappointed they dumped this, like you said, Michael, on the Friday before, I think it was Friday, one of the biggest weekends that we've had in college football's regular season. But I'm glad it happened. I'm not surprised it happened. And now the only question is, how can we accelerate the process and make this 2024 as opposed to 2026? Because as I've said, My utopia is in 2024, we've got Oklahoma and Texas in the SEC a year early. We've got the biggest SEC game of the year on ABC a year early. We've got a 12-team playoff. We've got the Big 12 all settled and ready to go. We've got stability and we've got everything. We're not like waiting one more year for this and one more year for that. And I would just love to see everything come together, which is probably not realistic. This is my Pollyannish thought of the week. In 2024, it all comes together. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but that'd be nice.
So going into question number 5 with this, to, like you said, put a bow on that overall conversation, but again, put your thinking caps on this. I'll make it easier on you instead of going all the way back to 1998. Let's just go within the last decade with this in mind. Which school or schools would either of you have enjoyed seeing get a shot to play for the title that you feel got screwed over? I know there's a couple of big ones. There's some Oklahoma State out there. There's some opportunities like that we could put in there. But which one of those do you feel over the last decade would you have loved to have seen in a 12-team playoff get a crack at it?
Well, the one that stands out is the 2004 Auburn team. That's a team that went undefeated in the SEC, undefeated in the regular season, had, I think, 4 first-round draft picks.
But we're just keeping it within the last decade.
The last decade.
I was trying to make it easier on you guys, but if you want to go with that, I mean, because
I could go all the way back to.
I was just trying to limit the
Kansas State.
The last decade, but either way,
yeah, Oklahoma State. I mean, I could name like 5 for you that got screwed with the old BCS system when. I'll
tell you what. Let's just go with that, and you guys, rank that you feel that you would have loved to have seen get the shot.
Well, that's one. I mean, that's probably one of the most egregious ones. I mean, it's almost unfathomable to think like years from now, you're going to tell your children or your nephew or your niece, yeah, there was once an undefeated SEC team that had 4 first-round draft picks and didn't get invited to play for the national title. No, that's not true, Dad. Come on, you're lying. No, I swear it happened. Bill Snyder had a K-State team with 1 loss that very easily could have been good enough to get in. What would have that meant to that program if they got in and won? Maybe all of a sudden K-State becomes more of a power, as opposed to now they're kind of in the abyss since Bill Snyder left. There were Steve Spurrier probably could file as much of a grievance as anybody because he had multiple teams at Florida that were good enough to play for a national championship, but Florida State would get in the way. It wasn't even an SEC team very often that would get in the way. You mentioned Oklahoma State. I'm trying to think, is there anybody in the Big Ten that really you felt like got snowed?
There's the Penn State team that won the league that did not get into the playoff.
Yeah, that's true. How about the West Virginia team that had that basically this ended Rich Rodriguez as we knew him?
07, yeah.
Yeah, I mean they were good enough to play for a national title. They stubbed their toe against Pitt. Now, in any other system, they still would have had a chance, even in a 14 playoff. Forget about 12. But it would have been fun to see them have a shot at it. So those are some of the ones that pop into my head right off the bat.
I'm going to go back in time. I think the 1997 Nebraska Cornhuskers would have beaten the 1997 Michigan Wolverines by 3 or 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, you've mentioned that. Yeah.
Easily.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned 04 Auburn. This recent decade, 2013 Alabama. Think about that. They didn't lose till the kick 6.
Right.
And they would have gotten, back even if there's a 14 playoff, they would have gotten in it. They definitely would have gotten in a 12-teamer. And they're pretty good. They didn't show up for their bowl and Oklahoma beat them, but that was a really good team that lost at the end because of one of the most bizarre endings in the history of college football. Mm-hmm. On that end of it, the 2017 Auburn Tigers would have loved to have seen them get into the playoff because I thought for 2 weeks in 2017, they were the best team in the country. They beat Georgia 40-17. They beat Alabama 24-10 by double digits. And then they got injured and they weren't healthy against Georgia in the rematch against Georgia. Georgia beat them and went to the playoff, and the rest is history. But man, that was a good team. And then 2020 Texas A&M, they were sitting at 9-1. That team won 9
COVID
SEC
year.
football games, and just didn't get in there at the end. And that's kind of, I think, part of being a Texas A&M Aggie sometimes is you go do it. And I had one more, TCU in 2014.
Yes.
The first year of the playoff. TCU and Baylor both, really.
Yes, both. Right. That was the light bulb to the Big 12. Like, we better get a conference championship game back.
Yeah.
We better do something about that. Who would have been in the year that Hawaii made it to? It wasn't the championship game, but it was a BCS game. Remember, they got completely throttled by Georgia, I believe.
It was 2007.
Okay. So I wonder whose spot they took. I mean, that was kind of a joke that they occupied a spot.
Was that Timmy Chang? Who was there?
Pretty sure that was a Chang-led squad.
That year, Georgia, I think, lost their first 2 games. I think they lost to Boise State and South Carolina or something like that.
That sounds.
And then won like 11 in a row, but still didn't win the division. They had Marcus Howard, who was a kid from the state of South Carolina that came off the edge. They were playing as well as anybody at the end of the year. Think about the 2002 Georgia Bulldogs, who went 13-1. Only lost in the cocktail party to Florida, and dominated everybody else. Or down the stretch, everybody else they played. They beat Florida State pretty good in the bowl, but that was a really good Georgia team in the 14 playoff with David Green and those guys.
Yeah, David Pollock.
I just don't know.
Mark Richt had a couple of those teams. Mark Richt might still be coaching in Athens if you had an actual extended playoff. Anyway,
exactly.
we could do this for an hour. Michael, go ahead. What was that, 5? I can't.
That was number 5. That was
all right.
That was it for the Hot Haney 5 for week 1.
All right, nicely done. I'm glad you brought that up, because if you hadn't, I was going to wedge that into our hot topics, because that certainly deserves a mention. And the timing of it was so janky that it's not a back page story. It's a story that could have carried the day. On the Don't Sleep On segment, I mentioned Delaware over Navy, Old Dominion over Virginia Tech. How many people probably didn't even know Old Dominion is not 1AA, but they've only been playing football for like 10 years. They've only been playing, and that is the alma mater of one Taylor Heineke, who lit it up in Conference USA when he was the quarterback there. And like, but it's Old Dominion. He's still in the NFL, doing quite well, as a matter of fact, albeit in a backup role. I would, for this week, I'm gonna do this not so much on upset specials for Don't Sleep On, but just games Don't Sleep On. Iowa State, very underrated rivalry. Again, they're not in the same conference, but they're right there. And it's, for obviously for the fans of that state, it means everything. And Baylor BYU. A lot of people think Baylor's going to win the Big 12. Could come down to Baylor, Oklahoma. There's BYU, a future Big 12 program. So I'll throw those 2 games in as the Don't Sleep On in terms of matchups. Everybody's going to be focused on Alabama, Texas. That game's going to be over in the third quarter.
Maybe sooner than that.
I mean, yeah, seriously, like, it's just like Georgia, Oregon. I was like, everybody's that game. I didn't think that game was ever going to be competitive, and it wasn't. Really, the only one that surprised me, I thought LSU would beat Florida State, but I should have known better that LSU still has some problems left over from the last administration.
Does that make you want to rethink your which Power 5 new hire, first-year head coach at a new school is going to be the new like Steve Sarkisian going into year number 2? You think? Well,
look, I still think Brian Kelly, unlike some of the other people we were talking about, is an established product that's won everywhere he's been. And so nobody said he was going to do it overnight. Like, nobody's picked LSU to win the Western Division this year, the SEC. I've seen LSU picked as low as 5th or 6th. And that's based on what they have. That's not based on Brian Kelly not knowing what the hell he's doing. People want to be critical about Brian Kelly in that game. What decisions did he make that were so terrible? Or perhaps maybe Florida State, which they've been like dysfunctional LSU on steroids for the better part of a decade. Maybe they're finally turning the corner. By the way, here's an under the radar player. The kid, the defensive lineman for Florida State, his name just eluded me, and I'm so it starts with a V.
Came in from Albany. Yeah.
He came from Albany.
Yeah.
And the only reason a transfer from Albany, the only reason they knew about him is that they had a game against Syracuse, and they're scouting the film, and Syracuse played Albany, and they're looking at this kid like, good Lord, this kid's everywhere. Well, he was one of the best players on the field in that game. So for all the transfer portal, like just poaching kids from established teams and programs, they got a kid from Albany who's a difference maker. You just never know where the talent's going to come. That's one of the things when you follow the NFL and you look at the two deep of an average NFL team, you realize there's so much talent out there that we don't know about or talk about, because there are guys from 1AA, Division II, Group 5 programs starting on every NFL team, all 32 of them. They're everywhere. It's not all Alabama, Ohio State. It's a lot of Alabama, Ohio State, but it's not all. So, yeah, no, look, I'm sticking. I'm not going to lose faith in Brian Kelly because of that game. They're clearly, you can always tell the way certain media members work. Like there's certain, like, for example, there's certain people that just don't like Dabo Swinney personally. They don't like what he stands for. They don't like what comes out of his mouth. So they are looking for any reason that they can to jump on the fact that Dabo Swinney's an idiot and that run is over and they're never going to do well again. What I saw on Sunday night, get my days mixed up, I saw that with Brian Kelly. I saw like a lot of people teeing off on Brian Kelly. I'm like, what the hell did Brian Kelly do to you? Guy's been a winner everywhere he's been. He's a class act. No, I'll defend that hire all the way. If it fails, it fails. But I think they got a good one. And look, Marcus Freeman might turn out to be the best thing since sliced bread at Notre Dame, but that is a gamble. Make no mistake about it. That is a roll of the dice gamble for a guy that, in terms of resumes, didn't have what some of the other coaches had. Doesn't mean he can't do a great job, but we'll see over time.
Brian Kelly won at Grand Valley State, dude. He was there 10 years. This dude's paid his dues. I mean, it's not like, and look, I know people don't, especially like up in Chicago, people don't like the fact he left Notre Dame for LSU, but not a lot of fan bases are going to like that. Those are fans. I have a lot of respect for him just because you look at his body of work, and he's not a guy that was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple. Right. He's a guy that worked his way up. So I got one under the radar for you because I know we're pressed for time. Virginia at Illinois. Sounds weird. I know, but
it is weird.
Hear me out. Okay. If the Cavaliers can win, and I thought they looked pretty good against Richmond. There's been times they've lost to Richmond. So,
right.
Tony Elliott's team looked pretty good. All right, so then they go Old Dominion at home, which I think, considering ODU beat Virginia Tech, there's no way Virginia loses that. At Syracuse, by the way, Syracuse looked really good beating Louisville. I don't know what Louisville's problem is. Yeah. They go at Duke. They have Louisville at home. They go at Georgia Tech. Virginia and Tony Elliott could be 7-0, possibly, heading to a home game with Miami on Halloween weekend. So that's their schedule's kind of backloaded. They got Miami, North Carolina, Pitt, Coastal. I don't know who scheduled Coastal Carolina. That was a mistake. And then play the Hokies at the end. But, you talk about the Virginia program, and Bronco Mendenhall did not leave the cupboard bare, right? He didn't quit because he was losing.
No.
And Tony Elliott's come in there. And, like I said, I caught some of their game. I like their offense. There's been years, like I said, they've struggled with Richmond or whatever. But if they win in Champaign this weekend and Illinois is 1-1, they lost to Indiana on Friday. Cavaliers could get off to a big start.
I like that. That's definitely under the radar, but I like where you're going with that. And you're right. The Bronco Mendenhall, not many coaches leave when they're doing well, and you've got like a franchise quarterback in Armstrong that any coach would gladly have. First-year coach would be salivating over. that was a weird deal. So Tony Elliott's got a roster he can play with.
Absolutely.
All right, you guys want to pick some games?
I think it's time now. If it was the first time we're doing this,
Okay.
the pick 5 here. Unlike a lot of the other shows or podcasts, JC and I have no idea what games Michael's coming up with. So these are not. If we were going to Vegas, this is not what I would, have a briefcase full of cash and just 5 random games that I don't get to pick. I wouldn't do it this way. But we're not in Vegas, and we're not actually gambling money.
And also disclaimer that if you're listening, do not take this advice or blame it on Mike or JC if they don't come through for you.
Don't listen to us.
Yeah. We're just a couple of guys just talking ball. We're not handicappers. And you take like somebody like the Bear, who I think is great, Chris Felica of College Football Game Day. I mean, last year he barely finished above 500 against the spread. And there ain't nobody that's got more knowledge when it comes to betting college football than that guy. But the guys in Vegas are pretty good. And we all knew people in college that thought they were really smart and called up the local bookie at the frat house to place bets. And I know a lot of people that they were calling mom and dad to try and bail them out because they were down 5 G's. Betting college football is fun, but it can also be devastating at the same time. So there's no money on these. We're just having some fun. Michael, what do you got?
All right, let's work from west to east. Gentlemen, let's go with USC, Stanford, and Palo Alto. The Trojans have not won in Palo Alto since 2014, but find themselves with new head coach Lincoln Riley as a 9-point road favorite. 9 points, Southern Cal. What do you got?
JC, if you remember, I was on the David Shaw bandwagon. I thought David Shaw was destined to do great things at Stanford, and I thought he'd be in the NFL by now. I was wrong. For whatever reason, David Shaw just peaked, and Stanford has regressed, and I can't figure it. But for some reason, that's just been the case. I know they have a good quarterback. I do know there are some good quarterbacks in the Pac-12 this year, but I'm going to have to go Southern Cal, lay the points.
I'm going to go Stanford to cover the 9. Southern Cal will probably win the game straight up, but they've struggled up there with what they call the farm. It's an early game. Stanford, for some reason, plays very, very well against SC. I know probably that 66-14 win over Rice has everybody fired up, but it's Rice. And, Stanford has a different style of play. They can kind of run it and play action and, pro style stuff that kind of can run the clock on you a little bit, keep your offense off the field. And I think that's what they have to do against. I'm not sold on the Trojans defense. So I'm going to go with the Cardinal to cover, but SC will probably win.
Game number 2. All right, game number 2. Sorry, I had myself muted, gentlemen. We'll keep moving along, and let's go BYU, Baylor, the Cougars. 3.5 home favorites, 3.5 points for the Cougars. Who you got?
Wow, I didn't know that was the line. Baylor's getting 3.5. I'm taking the points.
I'm going to have to agree. Baylor was awfully impressive their first game. I mean, I know it's Albany, and I know Albany's missing their defensive end, who's now at FSU. But, Dave Aranda's quietly done a great job, picked up where Matt Rule left off down there. Baylor has arrived, I think, as a program. It's tough to go up there and win in Provo. So you always have to keep that in mind with the elevation. But I think Baylor's just too good to be getting points in this game. I think they'll go win it straight up.
All right. Game number 3. Let's go with Iowa State and Iowa. Iowa 3.5 point favorites in this game, gentlemen. In spite of their offensive issues, 3.5 point favorites for the Hawkeyes. Who you got?
Give me the fighting Matt Campbell's and the points.
I'm going the same. Last year was supposed to be Iowa State's year. I think Iowa took them down in this game. Iowa's quarterback, guys, I'm not trying to beat up on the kid. He's terrible right now. I mean, he just – I sat there and watched that game. I mean, my man couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. He couldn't break a pane of glass. Throwing the ball, I don't know why they started this guy. And then, that makes their offense pretty easy to stop. if I got to just load up against the run, Matt Campbell's too good of a coach to fall for that. I think they go into Iowa City and capture the Cy Hawk Trophy on Saturday.
All right. Moving east, we've got Tennessee at Pitt. It started as Tennessee, a 3-point favorite, has jumped up to a 6.5-point spread for the Volunteers on the road. Guys, who you got?
Well, that's a juicy game. Like, Tennessee hasn't really been tested yet. I still don't know if they have a defense. We're going to find out if they do against Pitt, coming off a dramatic, euphoric win against West Virginia. Man, that's a tough line.
It is tough.
That's a tough line.
It's tantalizing, but at the same time, you think Tennessee could win by a touchdown in a high-scoring game.
Yeah. I'm going to go with the Fighting Narduzzi's to cover the 6.5. So that's my third straight dog. Okay.
I think so. I'm going to go with that. I think it'll be like a 3-point game. I think Tennessee fans, they're probably going to go in droves up there because that's not a place they normally play, and they'll travel well. Not as well as West Virginia did the other night, but there'll be a lot of orange in the stands. They remember losing that game last year. I think Pitt will score. I don't know about Tennessee's defense right now. And it'll be one of those barn burners that the Vols will end up kicking a late field goal and winning a very high scoring game.
A very interesting subplot to this game in terms of fans. Tennessee turned down the allotment that Pitt was giving them because they didn't like the section that it was. They turned in 2,500 tickets to Pitt last year to buy up at Neyland Stadium, but they don't feel that Pitt returned the favor. So there's about 400. There's actually 400 tickets available, guys, mainly for the band for Tennessee that they were able to take. So any other Tennessee fans you see outside of a few hundred there are going to be people that had to buy them on the secondary or tertiary market.
That's interesting. I've done a few games at what was Heinz Field. Now it's named after, I don't know, dishwashing detergent, whatever sponsor they picked up. But there's not many bad seats in that house. It's not like the nosebleeds or whatever. They're not that bad.
I think there'll be 10,000 Tennessee fans there.
I have to think so, right? Like,
I really, because Pitt. Look, and I was impressed with Pitt's home crowd. Don't get me wrong, because you're worried in a situation like that West Virginia's going to have them outnumbered. But I'm telling you, man, SEC teams don't travel really, guys, like they used to. But when they go someplace they haven't been, especially a stadium with some history, everybody knows the Terrible Towels. Everybody knows Terry Bradshaw. Well, Terry Bradshaw didn't play there, but he played at Three Rivers, but the same place. Everybody knows Johnny Majors coached at both schools. I mean, it's one I think Tennessee fans will care about. It's not a bad flight up to Pittsburgh, and you can even drive it from
you could drive
Tennessee.
it. Yeah. I'll tell you what, I don't know if the Pirates are playing that weekend. Go to PNC Park, very underrated ballpark. Yeah. Catch a game there. There's some good restaurants in downtown Pittsburgh. That could be a fun trip for the folks that are making it.
Parmonti Brothers or Parmonti Brothers, something like that. But so and I think it'll be a heck of a game. I think even though Tennessee probably had the right idea of returning their allotment and saying, okay, you guys, so we'll just go on the secondary market. And I think that's going to cause even more Vol fans to show up. All
right. Game number 5, final one, top 20 matchup in the SEC down in the Swamp. We started the Hot Haney 5 with Anthony Richardson. Guys, does he continue his stellar form under brand new coach Billy Napier with the Gators getting 5 at home against the upstart Kentucky Wildcats and Mark Stoops? Gators favored by 5.
Yeah.
Giving 5, excuse me.
I'm fresh off Kentucky. I have offensive line concerns there. This is a matchup of two quarterbacks that could very well, if Richardson continues to progress, I think Levis is already going to be in this category. You could be looking at 2 first-round quarterbacks. I said one of the overriding themes this year in the SEC is going to be this has got a chance to be a memorable year for quarterback play top to bottom in this league. Like historically good. I think that's only been validated by what we've seen thus far. You'll see both these guys on display on Saturday. I think it's got a chance to be a great game. Kentucky has had Florida's number. They've snapped streaks against Florida in the Swamp that dated back to the 80s, streaks against Florida at home that dated back to the 80s. I'm taking Kentucky. Give me the points. If Florida wins it, it's going to be a close game.
I think a key in this game, Kentucky's linebackers, which I think are good against Richardson and that Gator offense. I think you want who gets the best of that matchup, I think wins. I'm going to go the opposite direction, Mike. I'm going to say Gators get back on track and win it by about 10. I share those offensive line concerns, and I think they've got enough athleticism on the D-line to give Kentucky and Levis problems, especially down there. If it were in Lexington, I'd probably go the different direction. But down there, man, that place, especially after they won last week, Mike, they're going to be loud and proud. And, it's a 7 p.m. kickoff down there. So it's a night game. And you know how the Swamp can get. And so I think that the O-line issues, like you said, will be a big difference in this football game. And then if Kentucky's going to win, I think their linebacking core really has to have a really good ball game and slow Richardson to this Gator attack.
Now, if Chris Rodriguez is still suspended, I might change my pick. But if he's back, and he is as good as any running back in this league, Jordan Wright, their linebacker, hopefully he'll be back to get Kentucky at full strength to make this. You want to see both teams at full strength. You don't want to see anybody out for either side. I believe Florida is essentially healthy. I didn't hear about any debilitating injuries in the win against Utah. So I think it's going to be one of the best games on the board. I really do. Talk about defining yourself through 2 weeks. If Florida can beat Utah and Kentucky, wow, that's a statement. 8 days, if you will, for the orange and blue in Gainesville.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
All right, that is going to wrap things up. Again, JC and Morgan, presented by Blue Delta Jeans, the very best, and I mean best in jeans, custom-made to your specifications. You can go on the website and actually size yourself and then place your order. It's the same ones you've seen worn by people all over the globe, whether it's folks like us, whether it's athletes, musicians, you name it. Blue Delta has developed quite a name and reputation because the quality is that good. Go to bluedeltajeans.com. JC, for those that don't already listen or they want to tell their family, their friends, what do they do to listen to JC and Morgan each and every week? Do they pay like $50 a pop? Do they have to sign a long-term commitment? Do we need proof of a credit report? Do you need a credit score of at least 680? What do you need?
It's absolutely free. You go on anywhere you get podcasts, Apple Pods, Google Play, Spotify is a good one. A lot of our folks listen on Spotify, Podbean, Stitcher, just wherever you get podcasts, you can find JC and Morgan. It's even on Audible for those that like the occasional audio book. You can listen on Audible right before you get into your romance novels or whatever.
Trashy romance novels in the case of Haney.
Yeah, there's no
doubt about that. Yeah. That's when he's not stroking his guitar. That came out wrong.
Stop that one.
That was purely an accident. And Michael, I apologize to you and your family and your future spouse. Mm-hmm. All right, it's time to get out of here. Quick, abort. For JC Shurburtt and Michael Haney, it's Mike Morgan saying so long. We'll see you next week on the JC and Morgan podcast. Hope your teams win. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here next Tuesday.